All right, Mr. Champion.
What is your name?
Mary Beth Hall,
What position do you hold?
nurse practitioner.
And explain to the jury just real quick, as a nurse practitioner, what do you do at the burn unit at the med?
Nurse practitioner, I work under the supervision of the attending physician. Help make decisions regarding patient care, but it is under supervision. So any major decisions usually pass it through the physician for their approval.
Ms. Hall, were you on duty on the late evening hours of December the 6th of 2014?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall being notified that a patient was being flown in from the Pinova County area?
Yes.
Tell the jury, please, what you observed when Jessica arrived at the burn unit.
When she came in, she was covered in towels, so we moved her from the helicopter stretcher over to our trolley, which is a metal table. We took the towels off, assessed her, know that she had burns, face, neck, chest, back, arms, legs. So it wasn't burn on her, it was mostly the bottom of her feet and her buttocks and groin. So
Were they pretty severe?
pretty severe. Lots of third degree, maybe some deep second degree burns.
Now, if you don't mind, explain to the jury what's the difference between a second degree and a third degree burn.
Okay, I'll start with our first degree burns. There's the skin is red, but it's still intact, it hurts. Second degree burns, there's blistering. Underneath that blister, maybe pink, maybe red. And then you have your third degree burns, which is the skin is broken and it's white.
And typically third degree burns are tend to be very deep, is that correct?
Yes, you've gone through the layers of the skin, so they're also called a full thickness burn.
When Jessica arrived and you did your assessment, what did y'all attempt to do at this point?
We came in, everybody's assessed for airway, breathing, circulation. They'll call it the ABCs. We came in with an airway. She did have an airway placed in the helicopter, but we were not able to ventilate very well. So we called anesthesia to come and replace that airway. And also the attending was here.
All right, let me ask you, why were you not, or why was the airway that she already had in her not working?
It was probably wasn't so much the airway, it was just the burns on her chest were so deep you could not expand. You have patients that are on an ambu bag to deliver oxygen when a tube is placed, but the tissue couldn't stretch and move. So every time they tried to give her air, it just wouldn't go.
And so you called, I believe you said you called a surgical team or an anesthesiologist?
My attending was available. He was actually present when she arrived. He made some incisions on her chest called an escharotomy. That way the chest was able to expand. So the anesthesia team had replaced her breathing tube with an endotracheal tube, and we were able to ventilate her.
Now the jury here before too long will see some photographs of what appear to be cuts on the body of Jessica. Is that what you're describing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what do those cuts allow the body to do?
Body allows one for blood flow, because usually when things are that tight, the blood is not flowing, and also for the skin to expand and stretch.
Okay. And these things were done on Jessica?
Yes.
Okay. And what was done next as far as attempting life saving?
We did place vascular lines in her right femoral cordis, which was basically a large bore IV to give fluids and medication, and also a line in her artery to measure blood pressures.
And how would you assess her status when she came in and you and the attending physician were doing the assessment? How would you assess her, I guess, for lack of a better word?
Could you explain?
Well, I mean, what were your initial thoughts when you saw her as far as how severely injured she was?
She's critical, and the injuries did not appear to be compatible with life. So,
in other words, you do not believe, you and the attending physician did not believe that she would be able to survive.
yes.
Rephrase your question, please.
Did you and the attending physician discuss her condition?
We did, and it was just determined with the depth of the burn, the surface area involved, that it was not a survivable injury.
And were you also talking with Dr. William Hickerson?
The attending talked with Dr. Hickerson, but but I did not personally speak with him that night, but the attending that was there did speak with him.
And who is he?
Michael Van Vliet.
And who is Dr. Henderson? Dr. Hickerson.
They're both the attendings. They're partners at the burn center.
Okay. And I believe Dr. Hickerson is actually in charge of the burn unit now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. When you began looking at the burns, what did you think about them? I mean, the extent of the burns and the depth of the burns, what were you thinking at this point?
They were deep. It looked as if she was either unaware of what was happening, that they were deep, or could not get away to try to fight off this injury. A lot of times when something happens that hurts or stuns, you try to get away. And hers were deep enough to where it's like, wow.
Okay.
So
she was either unaware that she had been burned.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I think counsel merely repeating as a preface to his next question what the witnesses already testified to and be overruled.
If I understand your answer, the first thing that came to your mind was that she was either unaware that she had been burned or was in a place that she really couldn't get out of. Is that
Yes,
correct?
sir.
And what did y'all do at this point when you made the decision or the assessment that these were not survivable injuries?
We went to speak with her family to let them know, and then we started what we would call a comfort care. So we put her on some morphine drip, first aid drip to keep her comfortable until she passed away.
Was she conscious when she got to y'all?
No, she was moving, but nothing to command. If we said squeeze hands or kick your feet, she did not do any of that.
And what did that tell you? Or what? Just I guess from your training, when a patient is not able to respond to your commands in the condition that she was in, what does that tell you?
It's hard to describe. Everybody's a little different, but
Well, let's just look at this particular case. You said that the injuries she had were non-survivable.
mm-hmm.
Was that an indication to you that she was in pretty critical condition?
Yes.
Then when you discuss comfort care, did y'all put any kind of bandages or wraps on her?
Yes, we did clean her as best as we could. We did wrap her Curlex and Ace wraps to both arms, both legs. We did put a burn dressing on her chest and arm, or chest and back. No apologies.
And what was the reason y'all did all that?
Wounds will drain and she'll be wet, more so for family and for her.
Now, if you flip over, I believe it's 2 pages, there appear to be 2 body shapes.
Okay.
And it says Lund and Browder at the top.
Yes.
What is that?
London Browder, it's how we estimate the burn surface area that's involved.
Okay.
So,
In the colored in portions on the 2 bodies, or the 2 body shapes, what do the colored portions mean?
the colored portions represent the depth of the burn. The top half of her body, basically from waist up, was dark to represent that it was a full thickness injury. Waist down, those were darkly shaded, not all the way colored in, to represent a deep partial thickness or 2nd-degree burn.
Okay. So if we're looking at the top where the darker colors are, that indicates 3rd-degree deep burns.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And as we go down to the bottom portion of the legs area, that indicates a 2nd-degree burn.
Yeah, a deep 2nd-degree burn. There's actually on the key for a partial thickness or superficial partial thickness and versus a deep partial thickness.
And then the areas around on the left, there's a white area, and then on the right there's a white area. And those are the areas you indicated where there were no burns.
There were no burns on those
in our
areas.
vaginal area, in our buttocks area,
Yes, sir.
and that's represented on this chart. So what portion of her body, and this London Browder gives you an idea about the the portion of her body that was burned and then the thickness of the burn. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what was your final assessment as to the amount of her body that had been burned?
93%.
At some point, Miss Chambers passed away. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you have your notes indicated what time that was?
They do. 2:36 in the morning. 2:36 in the morning.
Was her family with her?
Yes.
Who did the witness, Your Honor?
All right, cross.
No cross, Your Honor.
All right, what instructions would you give this witness, Mr. Champion?
Ms. Hall may be fine excused, Your
All
Honor.
right, ma'am, you're fine excused. You can leave the courtroom, but you may stay, your choice.
Thank you.
May call your next witness.
Would you state your name for the record, please?
Yes, Dr. Aaron Barnhart.
And Dr. Barnhart, where are you currently employed?
I am currently the Chief Medical Examiner for Galveston County in Galveston, Texas.
And where were you employed on December the 6th of 2014, and specifically December the 8th of 2014?
At that time, I was Deputy Chief Medical Examiner for the state of Mississippi.
And did you, on December the 8th of 2014, did you conduct an examination on the body of Jessica Chambers?
I did.
And was that examination conducted as you just previously described?
It was.
And were you able to produce a cause and manner of death for Jessica Chambers?
I was.
And as part of your autopsy, do you prepare a report that is turned over to law enforcement officials and ultimately our office and the defense team for this trial?
I do, yes.
And does that report include your findings?
It does.
Does it include toxicology?
It does, yes.
Dr. Barnhart, you just previously stated that you began your autopsy examination with an external examination. Is that correct?
Yes.
Would you describe the external examination that was conducted on Jessica Chambers?
Yes. So the external examination was most notable for very widespread thermal injury or burns to the majority of her body.
What types of burns would you categorize those as?
She had a combination of second and third degree burns.
Were you able to determine her size?
Yes, she was quite petite, 64 inches and 104 pounds.
64 inches, what we commonly know as 5'4".
That's right.
In looking at her external examination, were there areas on her body that were spared? And explain for the jury what I mean by spared.
Yes, so she did have burns on the majority of her body. I measured it as 93% of her body was involved by burns, but she had a few areas that were spared or nearly normal, meaning they had intact, relatively healthy skin. Those areas were on her buttocks, on the upper backs of her thighs, and on the soles of her feet.
Based on those spared areas, do you have an expert opinion based on a reasonable degree of medical certainty on what position she would have been in when she burned?
I think, yes, I think the most likely scenario based on that pattern is that she was seated and that the buttocks and back of the thighs in contact with a chair was protected from the fire or flames. And same with the soles of her feet would have been flat on something.
Did you note anything else on her external review examination?
Not traumatically. She had a couple of tattoos, but otherwise appeared consistent with her reported age.
Once you finish your external examination, do you move to the internal examination?
Yes.
Were there any evidence of injury noted on the internal examination?
Yes, there was evidence of injury from the fire in her airways, what we call the larynx and trachea. But otherwise, there was no evidence of any natural disease in her internal organs.
So outside of the injury to her airways, was she perfectly healthy otherwise?
Yes.
Can you describe the condition of her face when she was presented to you?
Yes, her face was entirely involved, or virtually entirely involved by by burns and thermal injury.
Dr. Barnhart, I'm going to show you a photograph. Can you describe this? Can you identify this photograph?
This is a photograph of Jessica's face taken at the time of autopsy.
Dr. Barnhart, is this the face that you just described?
It is.
And would you please describe the injuries you noted to the face?
Yes, so all of this pink and red area is thermal injury or burns. I think you can see better here the partial absence of scalp hair, which is where it's been burned away. There is soot visible in her nostrils and on her tongue, and there are areas of peeling skin predominantly around her mouth.
And does her tongue appear to be a normal size?
It appears to be swollen.
Is this the way Jessica Chambers was presented to you on December the 8th of 2014?
Yes, it is.
Dr. Barnhart, these two photographs that have just been admitted into evidence, can you describe those photographs and what you see?
Yes, so these are photographs of Jessica Chambers of the front of her body, including her upper legs and one of her lower legs.
And does that also show some of the sparing that you have referred to in one of those pictures?
It does, and I actually should have mentioned earlier that I think I failed to mention earlier another area of sparing was her anterior pelvic area, which is here mostly covered by a towel just for modesty's sake.
Is it common to see sparing in that pelvic area?
If someone is seated, yes.
I'm going to ask you, and certainly Dr. William Hickerson is the burn doctor, but these areas, me not being a medical expert, when I first looked at those areas, it appears to be normal skin color, maybe slightly tan skin color. I believe I was wrong in my assessment. Am I correct?
Referring to these areas.
Yeah, and I say normal skin. It looks like there's not a lot of injury there. Was I wrong in my assessment?
Yes. So these areas here that are dark yellow are actually more severe burns than the red and pink areas. They are areas where the burn is so deep that that tissue has basically been turned to, has become like leather.
Dr. Barnhart, these are 3 additional photographs of the body of Jessica Chambers. Can you describe what you see in those photographs?
Yes. So this is the back of her head here. She had a good deal of singed or burned scalp hair, and similar to what we saw in the front of her body, she has areas of 2nd-degree burns and 3rd-degree burns, which is the yellowish, leathery type condition of the skin on her back. When I talked about the areas of sparing or unaffected areas, you can see that here on her buttocks and upper thighs, here similarly as well, and then the burns of the backs of the lower legs.
And finally, Dr. Barnhart, you actually mentioned her having what you call soot in her airway. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Describe for the jury what you mean by having soot in her airway.
So in fire victims, we will find what we call soot and carbonaceous debris. It's basically ash, blackish gray material that is coating or partially coating the inside of the airways.
And how are you able to visibly view that, what you just described?
We open the airway.
And how do you open the airway?
Well, we open it vertically with a pair of scissors in order to open it and look at the mucosal surfaces. And that's not something we do only in burn cases. We do that in all of our examinations.
Did you in fact open the airway of Jessica Chambers on December 8th of 2014?
Yes, I did.
And did you take a photograph of her airway?
Yes.
Can you identify this photograph for me that I'm showing you now?
Yes, that's a picture of her opened airway, including the larynx, trachea, vocal cords.
Dr. Barnhart, I'm going to move out of your way. Can you describe this photograph for the jury?
Sure, it's a little hard to get oriented here, but in a living person, one's tongue would be up here. It's absent in this picture. This is the epiglottis here, which is positioned deep in the back of your mouth to protect your airway. The vocal cords are here, and then this is your larynx and trachea, which lead down, would lead down on either side to your lungs.
And is there an obvious debris or soot around the vocal cords
Yes, and within the larynx and trachea.
all throughout?
Yes.
And do you see any discoloration of a normal airway in this particular photograph?
Yes, so the mucosa or thin tissue covering of the larynx and trachea is what I would describe as hyperemic, which means too red, generally associated with inflammation.
Could it also be associated with a heat injury?
Yes, I'm sorry, I should clarify. And one of the things that would cause that inflammation and hyperemia would be thermal injury or the inhalation of very hot air and gases.
And in a case where somebody inhaled hot air and gases, would you commonly find the debris or the soot that you pointed to just now?
Yes, that's what I would expect to find.
And Dr. Barnhart, in conducting an autopsy, do you come up with a conclusion or an expert opinion as to how this person died to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes.
And are there two findings that you normally convey in your expert report?
Meaning cause and manner of death?
Correct.
Yes.
And in Jessica Chambers' case, did you determine the cause of her death?
Yes, the cause of her death was soot and smoke inhalation and thermal injuries.
And did you determine a manner of death?
Yes, the manner of death is homicide.
Your Honor, I tender the witness.
Cross?
If you will, I'd like to direct your attention to your report. Do you still have it there?
I do.
Okay. And let's just go through it a bit, kind of section by section, so I can stay organized and not confuse you. Autopsy was done very next day.
That's correct.
Okay. And there's an indication in this external examination that the oral mucosa is unremarkable. That would mean what?
That would mean that it was not sloughed off.
Say that, I'm sorry.
Not sloughed off or not peeling.
Okay. And so the oral mucosa would be what exactly?
The inside of the mouth.
Okay. So it was not fluffed off? Is that what you said?
Sloughed off or peeling, meaning basically the insides of her cheeks
Okay.
were intact.
Were intact. Okay. And insides of her cheeks were intact.
Yes.
And then as we go further, you talked a little bit just about that she had tattoos. Those would have been on the right and left groin. Is that?
Yes, that's what I've noted here.
Yes. And also with regard to the external genitalia, what does your report indicate about that?
That they were atraumatic.
Okay. And atraumatic would mean that there's an absence of having trauma or anything like that, correct?
Right, no injuries.
And looking at the internal examination, I believe your report indicates that her diaphragm was intact.
That's correct.
Okay. Diaphragm deals to some degree with breathing.
Well, the diaphragm is a muscular membrane that is involved in breathing. It separates the organs of the chest from the organs of the abdomen.
And it goes on further, your report, to talk about the soft tissues of the neck would be atraumatic.
Correct.
And that also means no injuries or absence of injury, correct?
Correct.
The larynx and trachea Is that with breathing also?
So the larynx and the trachea are the airways that we looked at the photograph of earlier.
Okay. And there's an indication that both of those, the larynx and the trachea, are unobstructed, correct?
Yes.
And lined by hyperemic
Yes.
mucosa.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. And if you will, just a bit further down, let me inquire about, says bronchovascular tree is normal in configuration.
Yes.
Okay, and that would mean?
That the structure of the lungs was normal.
Okay. And just a little bit further, the tongue itself, Miss Jessica's tongue, would have been atraumatic, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and again, just atraumatic means absence of injury.
Yes, and specifically we're referring to muscular injury like contusions, for example.
Yes. Okay. You spoke that you may have had an opinion about the most likely position that she was in would have been in a sitting position,
Yes.
correct? You can't say that with 100% certainty, though, can you?
No.
Okay. And there were possibly other positions that she could have been in a standing position, correct?
Any position in which the skin of her buttocks, the backs of her thighs, her anterior groin or genitals and soles of her feet were protected, I guess that would be possible.
Yes. As far as, let me just clarify as to, there were burns on the back, on her back and on the back of her legs. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
As well as the front of her legs.
As well as the front, correct. Okay. Your opinion also involved the fact that there were no blunt force injuries, correct?
Yes.
And that the toxicology revealed that there was marijuana, nicotine, and opioid analgesics in postmortem blood samples.
That's correct.
Okay. And so basically a toxicology was found in these different types of narcotics or drugs were found in her system. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, redirect.
Dr. Barnhart, you and I went over the items that were found in Jessica Chambers' system in the toxicology report. Am I correct?
Yes.
And we agree there was marijuana found in her system.
Yes.
Nicotine, indicative of cigarettes, something of that nature.
Yes.
All of the rest of these, I'm going ETO, MIDATE, lidocaine, morphine, fentanyl, norfentanyl. What types of substance are those?
Those are drugs that would have been administered at the hospital.
This jury is going to go back in the jury room with your report, so I want to make sure they understand something clearly, okay?
Okay.
This section where it says the tongue is atraumatic, that is part of the internal examination, correct?
Yes, and that is that conclusion is reached by actually cutting through the tissue of the tongue and looking for contusions.
This is an external photograph of the face of Jessica Chambers, is that correct?
Yes.
And is there an obvious injury to her tongue?
Yes. So, and I'll clarify this. So, the external findings related to the tongue and the nose or nostrils are that there is soot in the airways, meaning soot in her nostrils, soot on her tongue. But the muscular tissue of the tongue itself was not injured. That's important in some cases. If you suspect somebody might have had a seizure, for example, and bitten their tongue, that's why that's mentioned in the report.
And how would you categorize the size of her tongue?
It is edematous or swollen.
Actually, Your Honor, I have no further questions for Dr. Barnhart. I would ask that she be finally released.
All right, Dr. Barnhart, you're fine. Excuse me, thank you.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
And do me a favor, everybody's heard from you once. Please state your names for the record.
Barry Thompson,
Investigator Thompson, again, where are you currently employed in what capacity?
Major over the Investigative Division of Panola County Sheriff's Office.
And going on that, did you have numerous local and federal agencies that were offering assistance to help?
Yes,
And did you actually accept some of the numerous local and federal agencies' help?
We accepted all outside help that we could get from any agency that wanted to provide help to us.
And I'm gonna back up. You were given notice that Jessica Chambers died on the early morning hours of December 7th.
Yes,
And when you began working with all these other state and federal investigators, did y'all start with a phone that was found at the scene?
yes,
During the investigation, were y'all able to determine whose phone that was?
yes.
And whose phone was it?
Jessica Chambers.
And were y'all able to get a list of numbers called on that phone?
Yes, sir. We had somewhat of a war room, command room, however you want to call it, set up at our office in our conference room. And there were numerous guys from various agencies, be it ATF, U.S. Department of Justice, U.S. Marshals, and other local agencies that all they did all day was dump phone records, dump cell phone towers, and collect data out of that phone and cell phone tower.
And were you able to retrieve the records for Ms. Chambers?
We were.
It's got to be asked. There was one name that resonated above all others early on in this investigation. Is that right?
Yes,
Did you ask Daniel Cole to have these firefighters prepare some statements for you immediately?
I did.
And what name did you start with?
It was Eric or Derek was the common names that kept coming out from the statements of the firefighters.
And when you started your investigation, were y'all centered on an Eric or Derek,
Yes,
but also investigating anybody and everybody that had contact?
absolutely.
Now, during the course of the investigation, and I know yours is limited, we'll get to that. Are you aware that there have been many Erics and Dereks that were contacted and looked into?
Yes, sir. I don't know an exact number. More than 15, I know, but I don't know an exact number.
And we were using resources from your sheriff department,
Yes,
mainly the FBI,
yes,
about MBI,
yes.
and explain to the jury who MBI is.
MBI is the Mississippi Bureau of Investigations. It is the investigative arm of the Mississippi Highway Patrol.
And ATF,
Yes,
and also we were offered a valuable resource from the United States Attorney's Office.
yes,
And all of these individuals participated in investigating any possible Erics or Dereks.
yes, sir. Along with the U.S. Marshal Service. They were also there.
Sure, don't leave them out.
Yes.
During the course of the investigation, did any Eric or Derek develop into a viable suspect in this case?
No, sir.
When officers started looking through Jessica's phone records, did they locate the individuals he'd been in contact with?
They did.
And describe for the jury what a contact interview is.
A contact interview, in the way we handle them for us, a contact interview is simply an information gathering interview. It's similar to a witness interview as far as gathering information. The only difference I would say is most of these contact interviews, Miranda rights will be involved because just to protect their rights in case they become a viable suspect at a later time. We always will advise them of their rights, but generally it's an informal interview that's not recorded. It's we take notes as we take these interviews, and it's basically just to lay out a timeline where the person tells me they were, because we knew they had recent contact with somebody.
And were you able to find out that Quentin Tellis, among other people, had some contact with Jessica Chambers,
Yes,
even to the day of her murder?
yes,
And did you, along with investigator Tim Douglas with MBI, conduct a contact interview with Quentin Tellis 6 days after the murder, being December 10th, 2014?
yes, sir. It would have been on December the 10th, I believe, around 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the afternoon, around 1500, 30 hours maybe.
Now, you described this contact interview as a fact-finding mission, correct?
Yes, it's just information gathering interview.
And I assume part of that information will be how he knows Jessica.
Yes,
And I assume part of that information will be where he was on the day of December the 6th, 2014.
yes,
Did Quentin tell you how he met Keisha? Or did Quentin tell you how he met Jessica?
yes.
Would you tell the jury how he met Jessica? Just in his own words.
Jessica had a friend by the name of Keisha Meyer. He met Jessica through Keisha Meyer. I believe he told us he got Jessica's number from Keisha Meyer, and they began to talk and text, and eventually the three of them would hang out.
And did you state how they communicated?
Usually it was by text or telephone.
And what would they do when they hung out most of the time?
Smoke dope.
Well, I believe he described it a little differently. They would be in a car, correct?
Yeah, they'd ride around and smoke dope. I mean,
Cut blocks is the word they use?
yeah.
Now, did you or Investigator Douglas ask him if he had ever been intimate or had sex with Jessica Chambers?
The question was initially posed to him if they had an intimate relationship. That question was initially answered in the negative, but then followed up by Mr. Tellis. He said they had sex one time.
And moving on to the day of December 6, 2014, did you attempt to determine where Mr. Tellis, where he was located during the crime?
At the time of the crime, yes.
And where did he tell you he was, and who was he with during the time of this crime?
At the time of the crime, he stated that he was in a location east of Cortland that is referred to as the Sandbox area. It is a location east of Cortland where we were today. It would have been east of Highway 51, somewhat south of the store from where we were, probably 4 or 5 miles southeast. And it's at the corner of McNeely and Hence Road. It's termed the Sandbox area of our county.
And again, who was he with?
He stated he was with Michael Sanford and Taryn Shegog, who also go by the nicknames of Big Mike and Tootie.
And ultimately, was that the extent of your contact interview, just attempting to gain some information in his location?
Yes,
And then you continue on in the investigation, or y'all continue on the investigation.
yes,
Now, we've already stated, and the name Eric and Derek was out there, correct?
yes.
And was it already out in the media at December 10th, 2014?
I'm sure that it was. I mean, it was highly publicized. I don't watch a whole lot of news, but I'm sure that it was out. Yes,
So people would have known.
yes.
And did he in fact tip you? Did he in fact give you a name of somebody
He
that
did.
thought might have done it?
He did.
And what did he tell you about an Eric or Derek?
He told me that he believed that Derek Holmes had been stalking Jessica.
Based on that information, and of course the information you were looking into that name period, did you or other investigators look into Derek Holmes?
We did.
And was Derek Holmes ever developed as a suspect in this matter?
Not as a viable suspect in this matter, no.
Now, in all of at this point, we're early in the investigation, correct?
Yes,
In all of your contact interviews, just in case, what do? You ask him to provide something?
we did. Well, everybody that was involved in this case, we asked them for a voluntary DNA sample. You know, if there was any evidence that possibly had DNA on it, to clear them or to be tested against that evidence, we asked for a voluntary DNA sample.
And of course, at December 10th, we already had the keys, correct?
Yes,
But we didn't have any DNA profiles back, correct?
no,
Investigator Thompson, you testified that Clint Tellis admitted to being with Jessica the morning of December 6, 2014.
yes, sir. He did tell us that they had himself, Keisha, and Jessica had ridden around earlier that morning.
After the noon hour, did he tell you that he had been with her at all the rest of that day?
No,
In fact, did he tell you he had not?
he did.
And he actually told you who he was with during the time of the fire?
That's correct. He said he was with Big Mike and Tootie, which are Michael Sanford and Taryn Shegog.
Now, this happened in early December. I don't want this jury to be, I want them to be knowledgeable regarding your involvement. Early December is an off time for the court system, is that correct?
Yes,
And we start back pretty heavy in January.
usually the first week after New Year's, we're wide open. Yes,
And starting in January, did you remain in the court system doing your job with me?
yes, sir. I had to come back to the courtroom.
So did you turn this investigation and any subsequent interviews or data analysis over to other investigators?
Yes,
Now, two witnesses.
Cross?
Good afternoon, Mr. Thompson.
good afternoon, Mr. Peters.
We have talked We've met on several occasions.
Yes,
You agree with that?
yes,
Now, December 6th would have been on a Saturday, correct?
yes,
And then Sunday would have been the 7th, Monday the 8th, and that's when you actually started your investigation.
yes, sir. As far as being present live, yes,
When you spoke with Mr. Tellis on December the 10th during this first interview,
yes,
you indicated that by that time, which would have been, I guess, that would have been the Wednesday following.
yes,
That's the date of the interview, correct?
yes.
Now, you indicated that by that time, the name Eric or Derek was highly publicized in the media.
I think my answer, Mr. Peterson, truthfully was it probably was because this was a highly publicized case. I said, but I don't watch a whole lot of news, especially when I'm working something like this.
So let me ask you this. Are you aware, as you sit here today, of any media outlet that would have publicized that particular information?
Like I said, me personally, I'm sure that it was out there.
Okay.
If you want me to name a news channel, I can't do that.
Well, no, what I'm asking is, you say you're sure it was out there. I'm just trying to ascertain your source, since it's a point that you seem fairly clear on.
Well, Mr. Peterson, this case was highly publicized, and you had media outlets running around down here interviewing anybody they could, be it a first responder, anybody that would talk to them, they would talk to them.
Okay.
And I know some of these first responders were interviewed back then.
Okay.
Now, I'm not going to tell you I'm 100% positive they told them that or that it was aired. But I do want to say that it was highly publicized.
Certainly. Well, now, so was there any other name that you're aware of that was highly publicized during that time? Was Quentin Tellis's name highly publicized?
No.
So even the media in this case, the names that they put out was Eric or Derek.
In the initial interviews, you know, a lot of these volunteer firemen, that's what they heard, and people were, that the name was out there, yes.
Right, but it was Eric or Derek that was out there, right? It wasn't Quentin, was it?
No,
Okay. It wasn't Tellis either, was it?
no.
Okay. When you interviewed Mr. Tellis on December the 10th, who else was present?
Investigator, Special Agent Tim Douglas, Mississippi Bureau of Investigation.
Just the two of you?
Yes,
Okay. And where did this interview take place?
in my office at the Panola County Sheriff's Office.
Explain to me, how did you come to be interviewing Quentin Tellis?
The group of investigators that were working on phone records got out of the dump of her phone. There were some text messages between him and her, and it was obvious that contact had been made. Recent contact had been made, whether his number showed up or whether it was a text message sent from his number. And we, like I said, we were just simply doing contact interviews with everybody she talked to recently.
Certainly.
That's how he became on the initial contact interview.
Okay. So you went, picked him up.
I wouldn't have went and picked him up.
Someone went and picked him up.
Somebody from whatever agency would have picked him up. Myself and Investigator Douglas, along with others, would have been stationary doing interviews as people were either coming in, called in, or brought in for questions.
And he was still in this area at the time, correct?
Yes,
And he came voluntarily
yes,
and he submitted to your questions.
yes.
Did you get the impression that he was being dishonest during that interview?
You know, I mean, this was, you know, Mr. Peterson, we do interviews in two different ways. There are interviews and then there's interrogations. And this wasn't a pressing interview. This was a contact interview.
So,
And it was just simply like a conversation like me and you were having. It wasn't a pressing interview. Like I knew that he was lying to me. I mean, that it was just finding out where he was.
yeah, I mean, but when you go out to interview someone who has come on your radar and you're trying to ascertain information, I mean, isn't it normal for you as a law enforcement officer to try to make some determination as to whether or not what they're telling you is credible?
Sure. I mean, we gather information and then we're going to follow it up by what he told us, seeing if I can, or somebody's going to run down what he told us
Certainly.
via his interview. But as far, this wasn't like I was an accusatory interview of him at the time. It was simply, did you know her? How did you know her? And where the last time you were with her?
And there were some aspects of that interview that apparently you took serious, because I believe you indicated that he told you the name of Derek.
Yes, sir. I mean, you know,
And based, I'm sorry, please.
in this interview, there would have been notes taken, and if I was asking him a question, most likely Tim would have been taking notes, and if Tim was talking to him, I'll take notes because most of the time the interviewer is going to concentrate on just talking to the suspect. It's like I said, I wouldn't say he was a suspect at the time because this was a contact interview. He was somebody that had recently been with her or contacted her, and we were just trying to ascertain what that contact was.
Well, I mean, you know, in this case, Mr. Tellis was being questioned about a young lady who had died a horrific death just 3 days prior to.
Well, we questioned hundreds of folks the same way.
You questioned hundreds
I
of
mean,
those?
we questioned, I don't know how many people we questioned. I mean, there were many, many interviews done in this case. Everybody that we could find had ever been in contact with her.
Fair enough. Now, also during this interview, he indicated that, and please, Major Thompson, if I misstated some of your testimony, please correct me. It's not intentional. You indicated that he met Miss Chambers through Keisha Meyer.
Yes.
Okay. And when you say he met her through Keisha Meyer, do you recall anything about that contact?
I think Keisha and Jessica were friends and they hung out together a lot. Of course, naturally, the M&M store is right there close to everything in Cortland, and it's the only thing in Cortland. So, and if he knew Keisha prior to that, saw Jessica and Keisha together, that would have been my assumption of how he said, I met her through Keisha.
Okay, now Ms. Myers testified yesterday. She said that Jessica introduced her to Quentin. Would that comport with the information that you obtained during this first interview?
No.
So during the first interview, it was your understanding that Keisha introduced Mr. Tellis to Jessica.
I guess you could say it that way. He said he met her through Keisha Meyer. So I guess introduction, you know, I think in his interview he said he met her through Keisha Meyer, that Keisha gave him Jessica's cell phone number, and that's how they began communicating.
Now, you also indicated that, and I have a note here saying sex. Did he indicate during this initial interview that he had had sex with Jessica Chambers?
He told us that he had had sex with her one time.
Okay. He did not, isn't it true that he didn't indicate that he had had sex with her on December the 6th?
He never said he had sex. He said I had sex with her one time.
Did he actually specify a date?
I don't know, sir. It wasn't a specific date. He just said that they had sex one time previously.
Now, you also indicated that Mr. Tellis says that at the time of the crime, he was with Mike and Shigard. I know those are Big Mike and
Yes,
Shigard.
that would be Michael Sanford and Terrence Shegall.
Okay. What was his understanding at the time of this interview as to the time of that crime?
He would have been given the timeline, I'm sure, whether it was myself or Investigator Douglas, of where were you at, probably between 5 and 8 or, whatever the time that would have been late. As far as the actual how the question was asked 3 years ago, I'm not sure. It would have been a timeline type of interview.
Did you keep any notes from this conversation?
Yes.
Detective? And do you have those notes?
You should have them. I provided a copy, or there should be a copy in the file.
I do not have any notes from the first interview. Well, I've got a report. You've taken a look at your report,
Yeah.
and you indicated that at the time of the crime, he indicated that, and on your testimony, I'm trying to clarify that. You indicated that at the time of the crime, that he was with Big Mike and Shigard.
Yes.
Did he indicate that he was with Big Mike on December the 6th, or did he give you a specific time that he indicated that he was with him?
As I said, Mr. Peterson, it would have been a timeline interview because he had told us that they had ridden around that morning, and then he had went back home, and that it was later in the afternoon when he had been with Big Mike and Terry in the sandbox.
What is the timeline? Do you have a timeline as you sit here today as to when Miss Chambers would have been set on fire? Do you know that as we sit here now?
I mean, it would have been the time, the exact time she was set on fire. No,
Okay, so if you don't know the exact time that she was set on fire, how could Mr. Tellis have told you that he was with them during that time? Because that's the crime we're here talking about, correct?
yes, sir.
The crime we're talking about is actually setting Jessica Chambers on fire, correct?
Yes.
So if you don't know the timeline as you sit here testifying today, how can Mr. Tellis have told you that he was with Big Mike and Shegard during that time?
Well, based on the time the call come in and the burning of the car, there would have been a timeline laid out. I mean, it wouldn't have took the car 5 or 6 hours to burn like that. So that's where the timeline would have been developed.
So an approximate timeline.
Yes,
So he gave you his location or his whereabouts at an approximate time.
yes,
Okay. Quentin Tellis never denied that he was with Jessica Chambers on December the 6th, did he?
no,
He told you he was with her.
yes,
Okay. And he told you that they being Miss Chambers, Miss Myers, and himself were turning blocks.
I think he termed it probably cutting blocks, but the same thing, yes.
Cutting blocks. Did he say whose car they were in during this time?
I would assume they were in Jessica's because she would have been the only one that had a car in her own possession. That would be an assign. I'm sure he told us it was in Jessica's car, but if he was even there, he just said they were together cutting blocks, and I would be my assumption from the other interviews would be that she and Meyer probably picked him up.
Now, you indicated that through the course of your investigation, no Eric or Derek became viable suspects, and that you explored about 15 of them.
Myself and other investigators, yes.
Certainly.
That was asking a broad question to me, but I didn't explore every one of them, no.
Certainly. You're aware of them being explored.
Many of them were explored, yes,
Did
by,
you? I'm sorry.
by various agencies.
Did you explore any of them?
I know that I talked to Derek Holmes.
Derek Holmes?
Yes.
Anyone beyond Derek Holmes?
None of the other ones stick out to me. As I said, this was done in groups and teams. It was, probably 30 or 40 of us working on this case, and they would pair them up, and everybody was doing interviews.
Certainly.
Be it ATF or MBI, FBI. I mean, we had U.S. Marshals. Everybody was going out and talking to folks.
Certainly. And Major Thompson, I'm just curious about because you had some participation in this investigation, correct?
Yes,
I'm just trying to ascertain the extent of your participation. So you spoke with Derek Holmes.
yes,
And that's the name that you got from Mr. Tellis.
yes.
Did you, as you sit here today, do you recall any of the other Erics that would have been local to this area?
There were, like I said, there were several of them, and just in our talking, I know that there were 15 or more. I think Derek Holmes was probably the only one that I talked to. Like I said, because it was a bunch of us going out and doing interviews at the same time.
Okay.
And that information would be funneled back to the DA's office or however it was being compiled. But I do believe that Derek Holmes was probably the only one that I talked to. I'm not sure that was the only one, but it's the only one that sticks out in my mind now.
What about M&M? We went to that store, M&M Girlies.
Yes.
Why do they call it Girlies? Do you know?
Yes, sir. But growing up here and being here for almost 40 years, Mr. Gurley used to own that store, and it was a community store, and had been Gurley's for years until it was sold, and they changed the name to M&M Grocery.
Okay. So we were there this morning.
Yes.
Did part of your investigation cause you to go to Gurley's?
I don't think I went there. I know various other investigators went to Gurley's, viewed video, and then I think they finally collected the video equipment.
Certainly. But you've never actually collected any information from Gurley's?
No.
Okay. So any evidence collected would come through someone else.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you the same question about Mr. Tellis's home and the shed that sits out front that we also visited this morning. Have
No.
you ever been to that location?
I've been there, but I've never collected any evidence from it.
What was the purpose of your visit there?
Well, I've been to Mr. Tellis' house and talked to his family before.
Okay.
And they actually rode with me to an interview that was conducted by somebody else.
Okay. Was that the only reason you would have visited his residence? You didn't go to his residence and take any pictures or anything of his house or the shed or?
No.
Yeah, can I say we tended a witness from this location? Thank you.
Back to the statement that Quentin Tellis gave you. I got a couple of questions about it. Mr. Peterson asked you, did Quentin Tellis admit they had sex one time?
Yes.
Actually, what did he tell you when you first asked?
He was asked the question if they'd ever been intimate. He said no, and then he said, well, we did have sex one time.
Okay. And Big Mike, we referred to Terrence Shegog. Are you aware he has a nickname?
I am.
And what is that nickname?
Tootie?
And based on your report, that is what he told you during the time of the fire.
Yes.
Cortland's a small area, is that right?
Yes.
It was fully broadcast when Jessica was set on fire, is that correct?
Yes.
Finally, Mr. Peterson asked you if you knew, or excuse me, did Quentin Tellis admit to you that he was with Jessica on December 6, 2014?
Yes.
What time did he tell you was the last time he saw Jessica?
Before noon.
So did he admit to you that he was with her between 5:30 and 8 o'clock on December 6, 2014?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor. I would ask this witness be found excused.
All right. Mr. Thompson, you're fine excused, sir. You may return to duty, remain in the courtroom. Your choice, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right.